Jack Hollister paid $2 for a woman with a sack on her head. At auction he marries her, when she says her name. Montana Territory, spring of 1869. The outpost of Fort Reliance was nothing but a collection of weathered shacks and tents, perched precariously on a windswept bluff overlooking the high plains. The air was thick with the scent of campfire smoke and dry sagebrush. A gathering of hardened men, their faces etched with the lines of relentless sun and endless toil, stood in a tight circle around a makeshift platform, a few splintered crates topped with a warped wooden door. Decency, a rare commodity in these parts, was nowhere to be found. A man with a sweat-stained bandana and a tin star hammered a dented canteen against the door. "All right, last one to go," he roared. "No name, no face, been covered since we left the Missouri River. She says she can work, says she'll do what she's told. Opening bid, $2. Who's got the grit to take on this mystery?" Laughter, dry and brittle as tumbleweeds, swept through the crowd. "Probably got a face that would scare a grizzly," one man hollered. "Or maybe she's just a damn scarecrow," another yelled, and a few men spat on the ground and turned away. Others stayed, nudging each other, their eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and cruelty. On the platform she stood motionless. Her bare feet were caked with dirt, and her hands were bound with a frayed rope. A canvas sack, soiled and oversized, was pulled tightly over her head and tied at the neck. Only the rapid, shallow rise and fall of her chest betrayed her fear. Her fingers clenched and released, a silent, frantic rhythm. "She ain't worth much if she won't even speak," the auctioneer grumbled. The silence stretched, tense and expectant. Then, a tall figure emerged from the back of the crowd. His shoulders were broad under a denim jacket, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed leather hat. His boots were scuffed, and his hands, scarred and calloused, spoke of a life spent in physical labor. He walked with a quiet purpose, a man more at ease with the solitude of the wilderness than the company of men. $2, he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence. The auctioneer blinked. "You sure about that, stranger?" "I said $2, the man replied, his tone final. A few men snickered. "Guess he's tired of talking to his horses," one muttered. The auctioneer cleared his throat, suddenly uneasy. "You don't want to see what you're buying?" he asked, gesturing to the woman. "I ain't buying a face," the man stated calmly. "I'm looking for a partner." The crowd fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. No one laughed this time. "Name?" the auctioneer asked, his voice subdued. "Jack Hollister. I'm a trapper from the Bitterroot Valley." The auctioneer quickly scribbled on a piece of paper. "All right, let it be known that Jack Hollister has entered into a legal marital contract, witnessed by the court and God." He handed the paper to Jack, who signed it without hesitation. Then, he turned to the woman. "You're legally married now, miss. Say your name for the record." The sack shifted slightly. A whisper so faint it was barely audible came from beneath it. "Elara Kane." Jack froze. The crowd leaned in, a collective gasp. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Jack's eyes widened, a brief flicker of recognition before his expression hardened again, fixed on the sack. He had never forgotten that voice, a soft lyrical sound that had haunted his dreams for years, a name he had never heard until now. Suddenly, the memory of a fierce blizzard, a small hidden cave, and the flash of firelight came rushing back. He stepped onto the platform, took the woman's arm, and led her away. He did not touch her roughly, but with a firm protective grip that said, "You are with me now." No one dared to stop them as they walked away, the only sounds the creak of their boots, and the faint whisper of a name that still trembled in the air, Elara Kane. The trail narrowed as they left the settlement behind, weaving into a thick forest of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir. The sun, a pale, distant orb, struggled to pierce the dense canopy. Elara said nothing. The canvas sack still covered her head, its edges fluttering in the faint breeze. Once, a gust of wind pulled at it, and she instantly reached up, her hands moving to secure it, keeping her face hidden. Jack walked several paces ahead, his old mule trudging behind him, laden with the few supplies they had managed to procure. He didn't turn around or attempt conversation. He simply followed the path, occasionally glancing toward the trees, as if sensing something more than just the wind. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a quiet understanding, born from a shared history of hardship and solitude. They reached his cabin just as dusk began to settle. It was a sturdy, compact structure, built from dark logs, tucked against a hill that shielded it from the worst of the northern winds. A stone chimney stood on one end, a neat stack of firewood by the door, and a rusted hunting knife was nailed above the frame. Jack pushed the door open with a groan of protesting wood, then stepped aside. "You're in control of your own space here," he said, his voice low. "No one's going to tell you where to stand again." Alara entered slowly, her movements cautious but not weak. She did not remove the sack. Her footsteps made almost no sound on the smooth plank floor. Instead of sitting, she crouched in a corner, her back to the room, her hands resting on her knees, silent and still. Jack entered behind her, placed a bundle of kindling by the hearth, and began to work on the stone stove. No questions, no commands, just the rhythmic sounds of iron scraping and water simmering. The aroma of a savory stew, rich with wild herbs and salted meat, began to fill the cabin. Alara did not move. When the meal was ready, Jack placed a wooden bowl near her. She flinched slightly but did not turn. He sat at the table with his own bowl, eating slowly, not staring. After a few minutes her voice came, muffled by the sack. "What is this?" Jack looked down at his bowl and stirred it once. "A meal for a survivor," he said. A moment of silence and then a soft, almost imperceptible sound like a stifled breath of a laugh. "I usually make this for myself after a long run on the traps," he added, "but lately I've been making 2 bowls, even when there's no one else here." He gestured toward a second identical bowl on the empty chair across from him, steam rising from its surface. "I used to set it for a lost friend," he explained, his voice quiet. "Just a way of remembering that I made it back." He paused. "Now I set it for you, and for her." The silence held, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Alara slowly reached for her bowl. Her hands trembled faintly, but she gripped the spoon and brought it under the sack without removing it. She ate in silence, each bite small and deliberate, but she finished every last bit. That night, as Jack washed the bowls in a tin basin, Alara remained by the wall watching. For the first time since he met her, her shoulders were not shaking. That night, with the fire reduced to a gentle glow and the last traces of supper wiped clean from the bowls, Jack sat alone by the hearth. He had not lit a lantern. The firelight was sufficient, painting long, dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, a familiar, mournful sound. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, letting the warmth soak into his face, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been 4 years ago, a winter so brutal it had turned pine needles into shards of glass and his lungs into fire. He had pushed too far into the mountains, driven by a foolish hunger for new trapping ground. He'd slipped on an icy slope, twisting his leg and fallen into a deep snowdrift, where he knew no one would ever find him. He had stopped fighting, but then hands, small determined hands, had pulled him, dragging him against the sharp pain of his body moving over jagged rock. The darkness had swallowed him. He awoke to the sight of a small fire in a cave, hidden behind a curtain of ice. The smell of boiled herbs, earthy and bitter, filled his nostrils. Across from him, a figure sat hunched, a woman. Her face was concealed beneath a burlap sack, tied just like the one in his cabin now. She wore layers of tattered wool and patched leather, her boots crudely stitched. When she spoke, her voice was soft, even, and tired. "You don't need to know my name," she said, "but you are not going to die out here." He had tried to speak, but only a raspy cough emerged. "Drink this," she continued, offering a tin cup filled with a steaming liquid. "Pine bark and dried moss. It will help the fever." He remembered the bitter taste, but he drank, and she had wrapped his leg, set it against a warm stone, and kept the fire burning through the long night. He drifted in and out of consciousness, battling the cold, the pain, and the ghosts of his past. When he awoke again with the dawn, she was gone. Only the dying fire remained, and beside it, a small square of woven cloth, embroidered with a single bluebell flower, a token he had kept, folded in his coat pocket ever since. And now, here in his cabin was a woman with that same voice, the same quiet hands, the same sackcloth, and a name, Alara Kane. He closed his eyes, leaning further into the fire's warmth. He didn't need proof. He had known the moment she spoke on that platform, not from the name, but from the sound of her voice. The woman who had saved his life had not wanted to be seen, and here she was again, still hidden, still a nameless ghost to the world, but not to him. He didn't tell her that night. He let the memory settle, a silent bond between their past and his present. He glanced back at the small shape huddled in the corner, sack still on her head, her back still turned. The same fear, the same need to disappear. But this time Jack thought, she wasn't alone. And that, maybe, was the beginning of a future that could outlast the darkest winter. The morning held its breath. A thick mist clung to the ground, swirling around the base of the trees. A gentle wind rustled through the needles. A high, slow sigh. Alara stepped out of the cabin alone. Her movements were quiet and deliberate, and she walked toward a towering fir tree that stood sentinel at the edge of the clearing. The sack still covered her head, but her steps were steady. At the base of the tree, she sat and turned her face toward the sun, which was just beginning to break through the branches. With trembling hands, she reached up and loosened the knot behind her neck. The sack slid up just enough for her to breathe in the open air. Her mouth, her nose, a sliver of her cheek, the world greeted her with a gentle breeze. It wasn't an act of defiance, but a fragile beginning. Jack saw her from the side yard, where he knelt beside a wooden trough, polishing the blade of his axe. He didn't rise or call out, but after a moment, he spoke, his voice low and steady, as if he were talking to the trees. I was injured a while back, deep winter, lost in a storm near the Red Peaks. I should have frozen to death. His fingers moved over the polished metal. But someone found me, pulled me into a cave, saved my life. Alara did not turn. She was wearing a sack over her head. Wouldn't say her name. I only saw her hands. He paused, then turned his head slightly, not to face her, but to let the words carry. Your voice sounds just like hers. A profound stillness fell over the clearing. Then the soft scratch of fabric sliding over skin. Jack didn't move, not even when he felt her eyes on him. When he finally looked up, she was staring directly at him. The sack lay in her lap. Her face was not monstrous, it was human, but it bore a long, jagged scar that ran from her right temple to her jawline. It was old and white, a permanent brand, as though cruel, frantic fingers had tried to claw something from her that would not come free. She met his gaze, no longer hiding. Her voice was a bare whisper. The owner of the saloon where I worked, he offered me a room if I gave him a bit more than he paid for. She swallowed. I said no. He didn't like that. She looked down for a moment, then back at Jack. He came after me. I fought back, pushed him. He slipped, and his head hit the edge of the bar. She stared past him into a distant memory. He died. I ran. Jack's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. They said I had planned it, that I had enticed him. Her voice wavered. There were no witnesses. No one believed me. She looked at her hands. They called me a harlot, a murderer. They sold me off to pay his debts, passed me from one hand to another like a stray animal. They covered my face so it would be easier to see me, as nothing. She looked at the sack in her lap. I wore this so people wouldn't look at me like I was poison, so they wouldn't see the scar and decide what I was worth before I even spoke. She looked at him again, her eyes glistening but fierce. I didn't ask to be saved. I didn't ask to be bought, but I'm done hiding. Jack stood wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't step forward or try to touch her. He simply nodded. Thank you for telling me, he said, his voice steady and warm. You didn't have to, but you did. She blinked hard, but no tears fell, only a ragged breath. And in that breath, something shifted. For the first time since she had arrived, she was not a ghost. She was a woman with a name, a story, and a face. And Jack had seen all three, and turned away from none. The sun rose gently the next morning, its light a soft golden stream pouring through the small window above the table. Dust motes danced in the beam like tiny blessings. Inside the cabin the air was still, no longer with fear, but with the quiet calm of understanding. Alara had said little since the day before, but she hadn't reached for the sack. Her hair, loose from sleep, lay against her shoulders as she rose from the cot. Her movements were still cautious, her posture guarded, but a subtle change had taken place within her. She moved toward the table, expecting the usual coffee tin and her wooden bowl. Instead, she stopped. On the table was a small silver-framed mirror, its edges aged but its surface polished to a clear shine. It leaned against a smooth piece of pine, angled to catch the morning sun. Next to it was a scarf of faded sea-green silk, soft and carefully folded as if it had been a cherished treasure. There was no note, no explanation, just the mirror and the scarf, placed there as if they had always belonged to that table, and as if she had always been meant to find them. Alara stared at the objects for a long time. She approached the table slowly, as if the mirror might reflect a truth she couldn't bear. But when she reached it, she looked. She had felt her face countless times since the day her life had shattered. She knew the ridges of the scar, the path it carved down her cheek. Her hand lifted, and she touched the mark lightly, the way one might trace a name etched into stone. It was familiar, inevitable, but this time, in the clean light of the sun, she did not flinch. The scar was there, it would always be. But so was the woman behind it. Her gaze shifted to the scarf. She lifted it with both hands. It slipped through her fingers like cool water. Care was stitched into its every fiber. She brought it to her head, not to hide the scar, but to frame what others would see, to soften her profile, to take control of her own image out of choice, not shame. The scarf settled into place. In the mirror, a new figure emerged. Not the haunted girl from the auction, but a woman, upright, still carrying her past, but no longer buried by it. Behind her, Jack entered the cabin. He stood silently in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame. But the look on his face was not one of caution or surprise. It was quiet reverence. He nodded toward the scarf. "That was my mother's," he said, his voice steady. "She wore it when she needed to feel strong." Alara's fingers brushed the silk. "I thought it would suit you," he added. She turned slightly toward him, her gaze unwavering. "Anyone who tries to make you ashamed of what you've lived through is blind," he said, his voice as soft as moss. "And the blind don't get to judge what's beautiful." Her throat tightened. Tears came, slow and warm, not of desperation, but of release. She looked at herself again, then gently placed her palm flat against the mirror, meeting her reflection halfway. And for the first time in a very long time, Alara Kane allowed herself to be truly seen. The peace they had found in the woods did not last. Trouble rode into the valley on horseback, a lone figure beneath a bruised sky. He was a lean, wiry man in a torn duster, his eyes the color of a winter sky, sharp and merciless. He called himself Cutter. He was a professional tracker, the kind who could read a trail like a book and smell a secret like a bloodhound. Rumors from the southern trail had found their way north. A scarred girl hiding in the mountains, her face once covered, now shone. A killer with a lumberman for a shield. Cutter had listened. By the time he reached the logging camp near Fort Reliance, he was asking too many questions. He pretended to be a prospector looking for work, claiming he heard tell of a trapper named Jack Hollister, who lived deep in the woods. Jack met him by chance near the supply depot. One look, and he knew. Not from the words, Cutter was polite, but the stillness in his stance, the way his eyes scanned the tree line. It was the stillness of a snake. Alara learned a bounty hunter named Cutter was after her. Instead of hiding, she chose to confront him. "This time I choose it," she told Jack. "Not out of shame, but for a purpose." They devised a plan. Alara would ride east, wearing the sack to bait Cutter, while Jack rode for the sheriff. The plan worked, and Cutter was captured. Afterward, Alara took off the sack for the final time. She kept it, not as a symbol of her past imprisonment, but as proof that she had used her former cage as a shield. A few weeks later, a woman named Cora arrived, an old acquaintance from the tavern where Alara used to work. Cora confessed that she had witnessed the incident, but was too afraid to speak up. With Jack's help, Cora signed an affidavit, and the charges against Alara were officially dropped. Free from the warrant and the need to run, Alara found peace. In the spring, Jack built a simple arbor for their wedding. Alara's dress was simple, but her veil was made from the very sackcloth that had once hidden her. She had washed it, and Jack had embroidered it with tiny bluebell flowers. At the wedding, Alara told Jack, This thing used to mean everything I feared, and now it means everything I chose." They sat on the porch that night, holding hands, their love a testament to a different kind of survival on the frontier. One not just about enduring pain, but about reclaiming it and turning it into something beautiful. Thanks for riding with us through this tale. Join us and watch the next Sleep West story for another night under the Arizona stars.